If you're aware of the online fandom for My Little Pony, you know how dark it can be sometimes. Disturbing fan content featuring the MLP characters wasn't uncommon to see back then when the show was really popular. One popular genre of off-color pony content is My Little Pony Creepypastas, /grimdarks, /darkfics, I've already done a video covering some of the most popular ones that are well known by mainstream audiences. You know, your Cupcakes, Rainbow Factory, Luna Game, My Little Pony SNES. Back when I did that video, I got a lot of suggestions for other MLP horror stories to cover, so I figured, why not try to make that a Halloween tradition? In honor of the spooky season, we're gonna look at some more MLP creepypastas. Grab some candy, some warm apple cider, and get comfy because this is, remember My Little Pony Creepypastas, The Revenge. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you people know about Cupcakes. This was an infamous fanfiction written by user Sergeant Sprinkles sometime around 2011. The fic is very, very light on plot and just follows Rainbow Dash as she gets tortured and cut up by Pinkie Pie. It was really shocking for the time, and that imagery of Rainbow strapped to the operating chair and Pinkie in her weird cutie mark dress is iconic. Forget Freddy, both Krueger and Fazbear, forget Jason, forget Michael, evil Pinkie Pie is a true horror icon. Cupcakes inspired several animations, as well as some spin-offs and continuations, none of which were by the original author. One spin-off I remember hearing a lot about was Muffins. This series of fanfics was written by YouTube user Raitana Seishin, who you may know for pretty much whatever. They've done a lot of well-known stuff online. The Muffin series follows the story of the original with a ton of prequels, sequels, spin-offs, side stories, featuring a whole new cast of characters. It's pretty much its own cinematic universe. One big player in the Muffins lore is Derpy, as you'd imagine. For those who don't know, it's called Muffins because the character Derpy in the fandom is known to like muffins. Since the title of the original fanfic is Cupcakes, it fits into place pretty well. The first Muffin story just starts with Derpy walking in on Pinkie Pie, harvesting some other pony to make cupcakes, and is like, can we make muffins instead? Derpy just goes along with Pinkie Pie's actions, and now Pinkie Pie has a brand new partner in crime. Sounds weird, but a theme with Muffins is characters just blindly being okay with putting pony meat into baked goods. Derpy does it, Pinkie Pie's sisters, Apple Bloom, Bab Seed. According to the Muffins wiki, which is a thing because genuinely why would it not be, these characters are referred to as the Bakers. A lot of the stories just revolve around the Bakers doing the cupcakes thing again, with some new twist or character development. There's no surprises here. Well, except for the part where the Bakers go on trial and then break out of jail, or Pinkie Pie's long-lost sister, Minkie Pie, who was held captive in the basement all her life. Yes, really. I feel like the Muffin series is what you would get if Cupcakes was some sort of horror movie franchise that they had to keep making movies for every year or two, like Friday the 13th or Saw. If you want a straight continuation of the Cupcake story, then this series is for you. It takes the concept of the original and pushes it to the nth degree. I've said this about stuff before, but it feels fanficky. You know, the whole idea of the Bakers reminds me of the whole proxy thing from Slenderman lore. Because of that, I also thought it was a little juvenile. But you know what? So is the idea of Cupcakes, so. While not really a sequel, there is another story by a different author that recontextualizes, that's a big word, the original story of Cupcakes. Rocket to Insanity follows Rainbow Dash, who keeps having nightmares about Pinkie Pie cutting her up. These nightmares drive her to a point of mental distress, and eventually Rainbow Dash takes it out on Pinkie, ending her life. The fic is a neat way of looking at the original, and of turning it on its head, but I didn't read just the fic itself. I found the nearly 5-hour comic dub. The Rocket to Insanity comic is an entirely different beast. It's inspired by an alternate ending to the fic, where instead of Rainbow Dash ending Pinkie, she just attacks her. In the comic, what follows that is a pretty real story about mental health. Rainbow Dash has to grapple with what she's going through, and Twilight tries to help her, but there's this whole thing about Twilight also having a crush on Rainbow Dash, which makes it weird. It feels surprisingly raw, like a lot of it ends up just being about the relationships of all these characters. Now, the Royal Pony sisters eventually find out what Rainbow is suffering from, and Luna has to go into her mind to stop the disease. As the comic goes on, you can see so much improvement from the artist. It starts out with these pencil drawings, and eventually ends with these big, surreal landscapes inside Rainbow's head. Luna goes and meets up with a parasite, which she actually has some history with because this guy turned her evil all the way back. You know, MLP lore stuff, retcons. At that point, the comic just takes a huge turn. Luna and this thing walk around having this big philosophical debate. I wouldn't be surprised if the Neil Gaiman Sandman comics were an inspiration here. Rocket to Insanity, the comic series, is pretty good, but so long. If you want to experience this for yourself, just look it up instead of doing what I did, because I watched the 4-hour comic dub, and reading it by yourself, I guarantee it'll go by much quicker. I think the story goes around in circles at times and doesn't move along as quick as it should, but when you read something, you can just skim over it. Problem solved. There are also some weird things that they add into the MLP universe. Some of the places in Equestria look way off at points, like too high tech, and there are astronauts for some reason. Another thing, apparently, in this story, having a same-gender relationship is taboo in Equestria. And I kid you not, the author made up the term Philly-fooler as a new gay slur for the MLP universe. I had a pretty good time with Rocket to Insanity. The hardest thing to get through with it is the length, but if that's not a problem, then why not check it out? The Experiments of Twilight Sparkle is what you'd get if you replace Pinkie from Cupcakes with Twilight. There's not much to talk about with this one. Twilight invites the other main 6 members to take part in an experiment and then starts doing some shenanigans. Butterflies is what you'd get if Cupcakes was about Fluttershy. This one's really short and is a little bit more interesting than Cupcakes itself. The whole thing is about hatching butterfly eggs inside a pony body. Fluttershy in this just really likes seeing people decompose in like a weird circle of life way. And before we move on from Cupcakes, I have to mention the Cupcakes rock opera. Something Broke, the continuing tale of Pinkie Pie and Ponyside, is a musical retelling of the story. This wouldn't be the kind of thing that I'm that into musically, but it is a really fun listen. Like most other Cupcake spin-offs, it was more enjoyable than the actual thing. Now, Cupcakes was the #1 My Little Pony creepypasta, but I have to mention Rainbow Factory as well. This fic was based off a song by Wooden Toaster and would later get a sequel song called Awoken, where a pony tries to leave the Rainbow Factory after he realizes harvesting ponies for rainbows is wrong, you guys. The song, like Rainbow Factory, was adapted into a fanfic, which, from what I've read, is pretty close in spirit to the original, even though it's by a different author. So, in the last video, I said that each main My Little Pony character had a creepypasta version of them, like Lesson 0 Twilight, Little Miss Rarity, etc. The one I wasn't sure about was Applejack, but after I said that, people pointed me to the one, the only, evil Applejack story. Like the name would suggest, An Apple Sleep Experiment by Magpie Pony is inspired by the Russian sleep experiment. For a while, I thought this would just be about AJ keeping people in her barn and not letting them sleep, but it turns out it's way more interesting than that. Applejack's family falls under hard times, and now they need to work extra hard to pay off their debt before the winter. It kinda ends up being like the episode Applebuck Season, with AJ not sleeping and having to work overtime. Twilight gives her a potion that's supposed to make her stay awake, but warns her to only use it as a last resort. I actually think this is really funny. In the fandom, there's this idea that Applejack is this super boring character because she never makes mistakes or has any flaws. This fic goes to show that because one of the only stories where Applejack turns evil, and it's because she literally drinks a scary potion that takes over her mind. So, like the Russian experiment, AJ gets more strong and aggressive, eventually attacking random ponies. Throughout the story, she's haunted by visions of Filthy Rich, Trixie, and the Flim Flam brothers. So I listened to the narration for this. The voice acting on those guys is weird. Trixie sounds and acts more like Diamond Tiara, and the brothers just sound like Discord. Yeah, when's Discord gonna show up in one of these? AJ's grip on reality loosens, as even more ponies have their lives taken. It ends in this big confrontation where a few characters go out to the apple orchard at night and try to give her the antidote to the potion. Applejack, of course, fights back. She has Rainbow Dash pinned to the ground, and then, word for word, repeats the monologue from the end of the Russian sleep experiment. Yeah, that really took me out of it. In the end, AJ is locked up, and Twilight goes to see her. She brings up the potion Twi gave her, but she's just like, "Nuh-uh, that was you." And the story ends with Applejack locked up forever. An Apple Sleep Experiment is pretty good. I'll accept it as the one true Applejack creepypasta. It mixes in a lot of characters from the show, and is actually pretty tragic. AJ just needed to make enough money for her family to get by, and in trying to do that, accidentally turns herself into a monster. And then at the end, she gets all the blame dumped on her. Also, Apple Bloom isn't alive anymore. I need to mention that. Keeping in the theme of ponies being locked up, we have the friendship test. We've got Starlight Glimmer in here. Starlight was introduced in Season 5 of the show, and people seem to either love or hate her. This story takes place after she gets redeemed and becomes a good guy, but in this one, she ends up going rogue, and kidnaps the main six. She traps them in a magic circle, and makes them partake in what she calls a friendship test. It's pretty similar to Saw in that we have some characters who are trapped, and they gotta make some tough choices to escape. I was never really big into that kind of stuff, but you know what? It's Halloween. I gotta step out of my horror comfort zone. Starlight does her thing for a bit, and after a while, the only thing you really feel is anger towards this lady. Unlike Saw, where it's a guy in another room telling people what to do, Starlight is always there, taunting the main six. At the end of the tests, only Rarity is alive. I like that the person playing Rarity in the narration I watched was the same VA who did Rarity in Daughter of Discord. Seeing this Rarity being the only one who doesn't suffer an awful fate in this is a real turnaround. When listening to these narrations, you start to recognize the VAs doing the same characters in different stories. And not only Rarity, but there were also some other of Discord people doing parts as well. A huge shout out to Scribbler Productions and The Lost Narrator, who did readings for pretty much all of these stories. If you want narrations for most of the ones I talk about here, go look them up. Last year, I talked about a story called Why I Stopped Watching My Little Pony. It's about this lady who watches the show with her kid, but something's just a little off. It ends with her getting an email from Hasbro about how they've never made any My Little Pony TV shows. Ooh. Now, this short little story spawned an entire series by the original author. There's way too much to just go over, so why don't we look at a few small stories from this universe? The My Little Pony Ride. In this one, a new narrator heads to Disney to do some urban exploring, related to this cursed My Little Pony show. She does her best to get past the guards, and finds an abandoned My Little Pony ride. This story isn't just a creepy My Little Pony story, but also a creepy Disney story. Now, Disney creepypastas themselves are pretty popular, the most famous being Abandoned by Disney. In fact, this one directly references Abandoned by Disney at the end. Like the thing at the end of Apple's Sleep Experiment, it kinda did take me out, but I don't know. The story in general doesn't do anything too new. The big creepy event that happens is this weird goopy version of Discord showing up when the lady rides the ride. She has some Lovecraftian breakdown about how scary it is, and then immediately leaves the park. Now, Flutter Schmooze is a fun one. Still in the same universe, it reads more like a case file on some weird occurrences with a Fluttershy mascot costume. Back in 2010, supposedly, there was an MLP event at this mall, and the lady in the Fluttershy costume seemed to be acting strangely. The costume was all dirty and leaking black goop that hurt to touch. And then they find out that there wasn't anybody in the costume? Ooh. I like the style this one has. I think some little bits weren't as realistic as they could have been, like them having mascot suits for all the main six, plus extras. If you've seen any of those things they do at malls, where they have MLP mascot suits, you know that they only have like 3 max. It also goes a little too far with the creepy stuff. I think they should have just left you with a little, instead of all the crazy stuff that gets revealed at the end, but it's still a fun story. One of these days I'll probably look into this whole series because the lore is pretty intriguing. Okay, so confession, I didn't have enough time to go through this one, but from what I heard about it, I think I really would have liked it. It's about Octavia, the cello-playing pony from the show, and her parents pressure her into being a musician so hard that they cast an evil spell that does a whole bunch of awful stuff, just so she can have a career in music. The puppet thing in the title is pretty literal because in a lot of the story, you have these strings that come down and control her. A Puppet to Her Fame is a pretty interesting story, so go check it out. Also, a bit of trivia, the fanfiction is actually based on this specific piece of art, which itself is pretty haunting. This is another thing I didn't have that much time to cover, but honestly, after a few minutes, I was good. Elements of Insanity by The Inverted Shadow is a series of Gmod animations. It's MLP themed and supernatural/horror, so I figure I'd talk about it here. If you go into this with no context like I did, it's just gonna be a bunch of noise, and even after getting the context, I still thought this was just a bunch of noise. It's based on this whole subgenre of YouTube videos called TF2 Freaks, where people make these weird versions of TF2 characters in Gmod and have them do random nonsense. In Elements of Insanity, a few TF2 freaks end up possessing the bodies of the main six, and then just do whatever. There is a story, but it's not really worth following. Whenever people would bring this up, I was expecting something more coherent. I guess this just isn't my thing. You know, I only watch real Gmod videos, like Sonic Zombies. Yeah, that's a throwback right there. Ponytown! I'm pretty sure you all know what Ponytown is at this point. It's a virtual place where people can make their own ponies and talk, hang out, roleplay, all that. It's got a lot in common with other virtual world games like Webkins or Animal Jam. It even has its own urban legends and creepypastas. Yeah, in case you didn't know, players of most virtual world games are pretty superstitious, since, you know, most of them are kids. A lot of games like that have their own scary stories of evil users who will hack into your game and take all your items, or snatch up your hard-earned virtual pets. Going on the Ponytown wiki, you can see a section called Creepypastas. Why don't we take a look at some of these terrifying Ponytown encounters? Number 1. Death Pony. Legend says that sometimes players will see a disembodied pony head floating above cave entrances. The pony will tell players to do heinous things to the other characters in the game. The wiki article also says that it's not real, but I want to believe. Okay, enough of that. The Lovely Mare Ritual. This is pretty much that one hide-and-seek alone thing, where you go to your party island in the game, and make a creepy occult setup. Say a chant, and the Lovely Mare will be summoned into your game. She'll chase you down, and if you get caught by her, your Ponytown account gets deleted. Truly a grisly fate. Also watch out, because when you activate this ritual, the ghost of the Lovely Mare infects your computer, and possibly you. Remember to pray after you finish this game, and go to bed an hour after the ritual ends, or else. Notavailable.ex is a story about a player who tries to join an in-game group called the Angel Scouts, but ends up encountering the Devil Scouts? An evil pony who looked like angel dust from Hazbin Hotel walked up and started calling the player slurs.
That's so gay! Homo! You...
And then they had their life ended. In the game, in real life, we never know. If it wasn't too obvious, most Ponytown creepypastas are just trolls. The Lovely Mare Ritual even had a thing at the end that said the page was a parody. In general, the Ponytown wiki is very interesting. There are a lot of pages for random events and players, even spots on the map. I found one article that's just this. Normally I'd be annoyed that people are posting random stuff on the wiki here, but I don't mind since the game has no real lore and it's all player driven. Other Ponytown creepypastas include the Ponytown Mothman, the Default's Curse, the Offline Pony, Poppy.exe, and the scariest of all, Ponytown.exe. So playing Ponytown one day and games start bugging out, all colors go funny, and started playing Dream's Mask on full volume and it hurt my ears and speakers broke, emoji. Very scary guys. Also my pony started going form default and all my ponies started flashed and it landed on my dream skin. Exploding head emoji, exploding head emoji, exploding head emoji. This one shook me to my core. Now, this is probably the most requested story for me to cover. In that one, I tried to cover all my bases with well-known MLP creepypasta stories, but I must have missed this one. Something Sweet to Bite takes place on the pony equivalent of Halloween. The Cutie Mark Crusaders have a bet with Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon to see who can get the most Halloween candy. Since their opponents are so rich, the Crusaders know that they're gonna cheat. To even the playing field, they decide to look up candy recipes in this book of old scary stories. While trying to make the candy, the Cutie Mark Crusaders summon the Candy Mare, an evil mutated pony made out of sweets. Things quickly turn hectic as the Candy Mare wreaks havoc on Ponyville, and then everyone died. The end. Okay, there's a lot more to it than that. I actually had a lot of fun with the story. The whole thing feels like an 80s slasher film. A monster with a tragic backstory who goes around town messing people up, and on Halloween night, no less. Even though her design looks way too much like Pinkamena, to the point where I thought this was another Pinkie Pie being evil story, I like the Candy Mare. Her backstory is so creative. In fact, there's just so much to it that I can't describe it easily. This unicorn who wants to make candy can't taste anything sweet, so he kidnaps this filly to be a test subject for all these weird candies he comes up with. He also feeds her flesh, which gives her an appetite for ponies. And since this guy's a unicorn, the candy he's feeding her is magic. So she eventually just turns into a monster that offs the unicorn and then starts going after other ponies. Also, she can make illusions and stuff like Pennywise, so it's extra fun. For the first 3 chapters, they cut back and forth from the ponies now to 1,000-ish years ago, where we see how the monster came to be. They don't waste too much time with these, which is weird because I was expecting them to do the cutting between timelines thing for the whole fic. It's cool though because they get straight to the point. Another thing they do is retcon the whole mythos about Nightmare Night from the show. Instead of being named after Princess Luna, now it's all about the Candy Mare, and how she'll eat ponies who don't leave out candy for her. I don't know for sure how I feel about that, but the biggest deviation from the lore here is actually just Twilight not believing in the Candy Mare. Like, Twilight has had to deal with magical threats every month of her life, and knows way too much about equestrian history. There's no way she's never heard of this thing. Okay, but one thing I seriously didn't like about this was how it takes a while to get going. They spend too much time in the beginning setting up the bet between the Crusaders and Diamond Tiara. It's 2 whole scenes between all of them when it could have just been 1, or even the Crusaders talking about it for a bit before trying to get the recipes for the candy. Overall, it feels like a real classic Halloween story. You've got scenes of characters preparing for Nightmare Night, running around during the festivities trying to warn people. The monster itself is even made out of Halloween candy. How cool is that? It gets you in the Halloween spirit, in the mood for jack-o'-lanterns and cotton spiderwebs, glow-in-the-dark Kit Kats, and those Hershey bars with the tombstones printed on them. Something Sweet to Bite is probably my favorite MLP horror story I've read this year, if not my favorite out of all of them. If you like ponies, Halloween, and campy horror movies, give this one a read. Or listen. Do what you want, you guys. Honestly, it's not up to me. And there we have it. Another look at some classic creepy pony stories. Did any of these scare you when you were younger? Or now? Let me know in the comments. A special thank you to my Yak Tier supporters from Patreon: Grimamerk, Shadewalker, Knife Girl, The Blazing Pegasus, Technicolor, Jack Getchman, Paisley, Trixie Best, No, Yak Best, Olive, SR Nano, Allison Madden, Alex Kincaid, Johnny Punchfist, A Kawaii Dragon, Keaton Cryer, Cascadiark, Bad Bessie, Damian, Marshmallow, and Goose Nerd. Happy Halloween, everypony. If you're gonna be eating a lot of candy, remember to brush your teeth. You know how bad it can be for you. Mwahaha.